Brilliant. Okay, let me just share my screen here. All right. And I'll
Amazing.
pull the
Yep.
window over so I know what I'm doing. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you for that. And welcome everybody. It's good to see so many different people here. I always love seeing where in the world folks are coming from. So feel free to drop the location you are at in the chat. It's really cool to see just so many people from around the world interested in platform engineering and the best practices associated with it. And it's always a good group that we have inside of these webinars. So in terms of questions, just you can save them to the end, or you can put them in the Q&A section as they're coming. And then once we sort of get towards the Q&A, we'll go through them as best we can. So yeah, let's just get rolling and we'll get through this. And I'll try to leave as much questions as time for questions as I can, because generally we get quite a few. So that is great. Like we said, my name is Mallory. I am the Director of Customer Success at Humanitech, inside of this platform engineering space that we call home. I am a software engineer by background, a full stack engineer for well over 10 years at this point. I won't talk about how long it's actually been because it's probably going to age me quite a bit. I've seen both sides of the dev and ops struggle. So as a developer, I got kind of wrangled into dealing with infrastructure and trying to deal with writing YAML files and all that fun stuff. And I found it very stressful. I found it very complicated and challenging. It's actually part of why I'm as an engineer. I've also seen the operations side. It's been a part of my life for a long time, and it is something that I did have to learn. And obviously, with the folks I work with every single day at Humanitech, I do see a lot of it too. So when we look at what we're going to talk about today, I come to it from the perspective of both sides of dev and ops and have kind of the empathy for both sides and what the problems are we're trying to solve and why this is so important. You can email me at the address listed here. You can also find me on the service formerly known as Twitter. Rarely post there, so you're better off finding me on LinkedIn or inside of the Platform Engineering Slack community. If you will be at KubeCon next week, I will be there. I will actually be part of the Platform Engineering Day doing a very cool panel with some other thought leaders in the platform engineering space. And then also you can find me at the Humanitech booth the rest of the conference. Come say hi and yeah, come introduce yourself. So let's get rolling. Today I want to talk about four kind of critical things. And the first thing is I want to look at what the MVP is. So in our context, that is a minimum viable platform. So let's start with that foundational information. The next thing we're going to do is go through the four phases of the MVP. So we break them down into a four-phase approach that not only makes it easier to follow, but also allows you to plan a little bit better and to be able to think more about what you're going to do when. I also want to go over some common pitfalls you're likely to hit and how this process by nature actually helps you avoid them. So it's always interesting to see some of the examples people come up with outside of understanding what we see as pitfalls here. And I hope I can help you avoid some if at all possible. And then finally, the thing I am asked most often is what happens after the MVP. So I want to touch on that a little bit and give you some information on what we recommend and what we see and how you can prepare yourself for success for the long term. So let's start with probably the most basic thing. What is a minimum viable platform? Other than just another confusing acronym that we like to throw out there, it is very similar to the concept of a minimum viable product. And because platform engineering has that tenet of thinking of your platform like a product, this sort of fits in. But what's important is that it's in the context of the platform, not just as, let's say, a deliverable. It is in this broader context of a thing, a thought process, and a way of organizing engineering groups. And that is why it's kind of its own thing outside of a minimum viable product. Either way, I also just like to confuse people. So why should you consider doing an MVP if you're starting a platform engineering initiative or you have one started and you're not sure what to do next? Realistically, these are a way to show value inside of your PE initiatives. And the real catch here is that it's able to be done quickly. What you're doing is following a very proven structure. You're following a pathway, a time-tested pathway that enables you to meet a bunch of objectives that are generally very critical to the success of these initiatives. So those are things like you're going to identify a pioneering team that can lead the way on innovation. So this can be an application developer team. It could be a combination of application developers and operations folks. It can be a lot of different things. Building a representative first version of your platform is the real big outcome here. So what you're going to do at the end of this, and what you're going to have the knowledge of, is what your platform looks like and how you're going to grow it. The context you're going to use is that pioneering team, that pioneering part of your organization, and what their needs are in a non-production context. Like I said, you're going to come out of this as well with a product-like roadmap for iteration and growth. If you treat your platform like a product, you know that you will need to have a feature map. You know that you will need to have a roadmap. And you also know that you're going to have to prioritize what comes next. And that's all part of the MVP process. One of the other outcomes you'll have when you do an MVP, and one of the things that really solves a lot of problems, is seeking out and engaging with the influential stakeholders who actually will be able to drive adoption of the platform once it's made ready for folks to onboard to. I cannot tell you enough how important it is to get your stakeholders on board early and to get them excited and maintain their excitement. So plant the seed and grow it. Realistically, those stakeholders come from a lot of different places, and we'll look at that. But think now that it has to go just beyond your engineering organization, that it's really important to get everyone on board as soon as you can. The other thing that I think is quite interesting with MVPs, and why you should consider this as the methodology for starting your platform engineering initiative, is that you can scale sensibly. You are not going to win over every technical team right away. You're going to get development teams that are going to say, no, I'm quite happy writing 3,000 YAML files and doing this all manually and using kubectl. Leave me alone. But when you start proving success and the value of that platform engineering initiative by doing things the right way, those people will have an easier time realizing that the change is for the better. If you try and force everyone to do something at once, it's not going to work. So that's really what's cool about this, and one of the reasons why you should absolutely consider doing things this way. What we also need to think about when we want to do an MVP is how you're going to design it. So I don't mean just design in the context of picking individual technologies. I mean as sort of an experience as a whole. And there's three primary drivers I want you to think about here. The first is that this thing should be representative. It should be representative of basic resources and components that are common across your whole technical estate. It should take into consideration the common application infrastructure, the application structure, as well as the team composition that you have in mind. So for example, you might want to make sure that you use Postgres as the first database type that you bring into your platform as an availability. And that's simply because the most of your teams use it. If the first team you're thinking of is a team that only uses MySQL and everyone else uses Postgres, it's probably not the right team. You're going to want something that's representative of a majority of the estate. The other thing you're going to want to take into consideration early on is your pipelines. So what are the most critical components of that CI and CD pipeline that are going to be absolutely necessary to show and tell first? So that's probably going to be really basic things like GitHub Actions, like your image storage and how that feeds into the rest of the system, what your CD end of things looks like. Are you using something like Argo? What are you doing at the end, and how is everything talking to each other? When you look at structure of applications, this could be finding something that is representative of, applications that are split up into different services like front end, back end, and data layers. If you are a generally microservice shop, don't go grab the biggest monolith you have and make that the thing you design your MVP around. Try to keep it representative to the teams and the groups you're working with. And then also make sure that you're cognizant of things like ingress and DNS. What is commonly used across the org? This is a really interesting one that we see people kind of forget about a lot. But if most of your folks are, using some sort of API gateway, or most folks are touching into private clusters, you really probably want to consider doing that stuff first. And make sure that you're representing as much of that estate as you can. The next thing you need to think about is being repeatable. So what you are building here, and also the process you are going through of understanding what your application developer team's needs are, should be something you can use again, again, and again. It can be used as a quick start. The technical component of the MVP itself, so the actual platform you build, should be the building blocks, the foundation for which the house of your full-scale production-grade platform is built. It is not worth reinventing the wheel. So keep that in mind when you're building it. Think it's a quick start. Think it's a hello world, even is another way of describing it. And I think sometimes it's easy to get off that path and try to make something more than it needs to be at this stage. But remember that you're building a foundation. You're not building an entire house. Finally, it should be iterative. And I think that ties really well into repeatable. So know that what you need to do now is start small, but the future is coming. You can absolutely think about it. But don't be afraid to ask yourself the hard questions and prioritize and throw things into a backlog that aren't going to be of the highest value. The things that make the most impact are the things that have to come first. And we'll look at that in a little bit. Commitment to this stuff is required to scale. I don't know if I have to really say that, but I'm going to anyway. If you are willing to really have a platform engineering initiative go well, you have to be committed to growing it over time and taking feedback and making change. So that's incredibly important here. So let's look at the 4 phases of the MVP. Now, these 4 phases, generally speaking, can be a little bit fluid. There's definitely overlap between them. Every single day I see someone jumping ahead to something, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what's important is understanding that inside the context of the MVP, we break things into phases to make them understandable, to make it easy to plan out, and also to make it easy to execute against. If you are walking into a brand new way of doing things, it is so much easier to work around a framework than it is to start from scratch. Think about rapid application development as a principle. Think about this as rapid platform development. So in our first phase, what we want to do is really focus on technical outcomes and discovery of golden paths. And what I mean by that is understanding really what is needed at this stage and what's going to be the biggest impact drivers for the folks that will be testing this thing and demoing it to the rest of your org. You also need to make sure at this stage that project planning and project management alignment is really solid. There is absolutely no point in doing this if you do not plan things out. And if your project managers between, let's say, the platform side and the application side do not work together. They have to be aligned on what you're trying to achieve. Once you have that, you can go into what we call the integration phase. And this is where you're going to build the baseline of the platform. So this is stuff like bringing in your components of databases, your components of the application, making sure the environments are structured accordingly. Infrastructure integration is key here. So where are your databases? Where are your observability layers? What does that look like? How are you going to configure the environments around the different applications you need and the different contexts that you have to work in? Phase 3 is another technical phase, and this is the deployment phase. So this is where the applications themselves need to come in. So bring in your workloads, make sure that what is accessible is defined and it's usable inside of the context of that application, but also that you're looking at the pipeline. And the pipeline should really align with the golden paths that you discover at the beginning to serve a particular need. So that could be, we want an element of self-service, especially around ephemeral environments. If that is really important to you, this is where you're going to make sure that you build that into the MVP. In phase 4, adoption planning, you can call it whichever. What you want to achieve is to have end-to-end flow testing against those golden paths that you set out in the beginning. So prove that you can now do those things and show the difference between the way it was done and the way it is now. I call this a bake-off. So you're going to bring cupcakes from the way things were done before and the way you're doing things now, and get your teams to test them and tell you what's better. Ideally, this is also where you're planning out how you're going to do internal demos, as well as what adoption looks like across your org. And there are, different things you can do after MVP, which I'll talk about to make this easier. But no matter what, you need to think here about planning a roadmap. And planning a roadmap not just for technical features, but for parts of the organization that need to come on or are eligible to come on to a platform in the span of your adoption period. No matter what, remember to keep the infrastructure simple, keep the application simple, representative, keep them scalable. We'll get into some pitfalls, but you don't need to solve every problem under the sun now. It's okay to plan things and take a longer time, but no matter what, these are the things you want to try and achieve inside of these 4 phases. I have seen this done, by the way, in a matter of days. I've also seen it take weeks. You can do what you need to do to work for you, but if you work inside the phases, you're going to have an easier time keeping organized. So let's look at some of the pitfalls, some of the things I want you to try and avoid because I've seen them a million times, and some of the solutions that are built in to this concept of MVP to help you avoid these. Sometimes things are unavoidable, but there is strategy in the design of the MVP to help you avoid these things as a general rule. So the first one that I see a lot is this idea of rush into complexity. And I've brought this up a few times. The idea here is you need to start small, you need to iterate, and you need to grow. Think about continuous improvement, not solving all of the technical problems of your teams now. You can't, I promise you. And if you think you can, no one's going to use it. I'll touch on that in a little bit. Keep things simple, have eyes on the horizon, but focus. Focus on the outcomes and the value you can deliver now. The other pitfall people fall into is that they only focus on tools, technology, fun stuff. I'm an engineer. I get stuck in this all the time. Ooh, shiny. I want to play with it. It's not going to help you if you focus on things in only a technical sense. Remember that at the end of the day, why platform engineering is so much better is because it focuses on people and the outcomes that people can have when things are done a better way. So if you focus on supported golden paths, if you focus on really driving value, and I don't just mean that in the sales sense, you want to have impact. The platform should do something for people. Focus on what it should do and what you've aimed for it to do inside of the MVP. And then what you're going to do is track usage and adoption in order to decide what you do next with tools and tech stack. Don't just make assumptions. And that's a perfect segue into the other pitfall of building a platform that no one will use. If you make assumptions and you just decide to do things a certain way because you think that's the way people will want things to work, I promise you it will fail. You need to focus on the users who are your customers in this case and the right level of abstraction. What this often looks like is abstraction that results in productivity, on impact, and on satisfaction. Abstracting for no reason or throwing random crap in there that no one wants to use is not going to get you adoption. It is absolutely critical to focus on abstraction, but done responsibly. Can't say that enough. Finally, and I think this one is coming up more and more, and I'm really glad to see people talking about it, is that developer experience isn't just for developers. Often what I see as a failure point is people think DevX is just for devs. They don't consider anyone else that might be involved inside of developer experience and where that touches. That means folks like finance, folks like security, your developer relations team, if you have one. It has impact on the business as well. So a DevX initiative done well touches so many different parts of an organization that you absolutely have to think about it in that way. So my best practice for you in this case is to find pioneers and build champions, build a community around solving these problems, get people excited about the value you're trying to drive with building a platform, not just because it's a fun, cool toy that you really want to try and some guy on LinkedIn told you needed to do it. Build a community that is geared towards solving problems that touch all parts of the organization, and it is much easier to get things done. And like I said, the MVP structure as a whole is designed to prevent you from falling into these pitfalls. You might still, but awareness is half the battle. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the journey. So the next thing I want to touch on is going beyond the MVP. And this is, I think I said this earlier, something I get asked so often. Okay, now what do I do? We've done this. People like it. What's next? It isn't scary to go beyond MVP, I promise, despite the fact it may look it. So we have a very scalable way of going through adoption of a platform and getting it inside of your organization as a whole, getting the buy-in We have a very defined way of doing this, and it works because it's scalable and it is sustainably growing. You're not trying to throw everything at it at once. You're taking the time to build it up and to gradually get to a point where the value is undeniable to the folks inside of your organization. What you need to do is start early with adoption planning and design. You need to design what that is going to look like. You need to have an understanding of when things are going to happen. There's always flexibility on timelines, but it's important to do anyway. And then you also have to have a clear picture of what your goals are. My biggest piece of advice to people is no matter what, make sure that you start this thing with the right goals and outcomes in mind and keep those as your North Star through this whole process. Our process looks like this. And it's a timeline, but remembering that timelines have fluidity and that timelines also have, the ability to be flexible. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to understand your problems. This is the assess and recommend thing. And here you're going to take developer needs, you're going to take best practices. For example, you guys attending this webinar is observing a best practice. You're trying to learn about it. That's great. You want to take that and now combine it with those dev needs in an existing tool chain and start that baseline improve. So that's your MVP. And the MVP is part of an overall proof of concept for a lot of teams. So that's why I've put it up here this way. And inside of that proof of concept, we do two things. So we do that baseline improve with the MVP. We build this thing out and we show what it can do and what the promise of it is and what its value is. And then we start after that is the seeding and scaling process. We call that production readiness, but basically the idea to that is that you're taking it towards production grade inside of a proof of concept. You do not need to touch production, but it needs to be ready to go there. There are a lot of organizations that will never buy into such a change-heavy concept like this without seeing what it looks like in a production grade context. Like I said, though, you don't actually have to touch prod. The idea behind it is that you can showcase what it can do in a real scenario, not just with a, hello world app. That's why the evolution from MVP inside of this is very important. Once you've done that and you start getting new adopters, there's a cycle that happens. And that cycle is that evolution and support of the platform. So you'll have new adopters that brings on new features. And every time you do that, you're going to get feedback. You're going to prioritize that feedback and evolve the platform accordingly. And that is a cycle that will just repeat ad infinitum. Even when all of your teams are onboarded, their needs might change. What they want that platform to do, what abstraction layers are in place, it could change. And that's what is so exciting about this stuff is that it is like a product. It's always evolving. Excuse me. So what's really important here is that you look at your own scenario and understand the outcomes you want to have. Understand the timelines you are up against. You may not have any, but there are some orgs that will come to us and say, hey, we need to have 80% of our estate on a platform by the end of 2025. This is a mandate from the top. How the hell are we going to do this? And what we do is we look at this, this roadmap, this planning, and we break things down into logical steps. So we start with this proof of concept. Now what do we do? Okay, we're going to head, after we do that production readiness step, we're now actually going to head towards adoption. What needs to happen? What team needs to come on when? How do we prioritize those teams? That's always something we work on actually inside of MVPs. We've really started that early. The earlier you think about what comes next, the easier it is to get there. Do not leave adoption planning to the very end of your MVP. Do not think about it beforehand. You need to think about it early on because overall, that's your goal. You want the platform to be adopted inside your org. And my biggest piece of advice to you is just plan early and think early. So that's generally what we see as the evolution and the life cycle of these platforms. When you're looking at adoption planning, I really want to give you 5 quick steps to success. So it's the 5 Ds. You can think of it that way. But here's what you need to do when you start this process early, and you can actually build your whole MVP around this. So the first thing you need to do is define your objectives and goals. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you trying to achieve it? And who is going to benefit? Ideally, the value is not just inside of your engineering org. It's going to have cost savings. It's going to have standardization and security layers. It's going to have business impact by driving a faster time to market. Those are all things that are very, very reasonable objectives and goals. The second thing you're going to do is decide on the cohorts and the prioritization of those cohorts. So by cohorts, I mean groups of teams or applications that are logically fit together. So let's say after MVP, the first group of folks you need to adopt is going to be anyone that has a microservices app that is using Argo on the end of the CD things. Great. Okay. Now you need to make sure you can support those guys accordingly. And how you prioritize them can vary depending on what your internal needs are. But generally, you're going to find that the folks that need to come first are the ones that are building greenfield applications. I would always say that, no matter what, get those folks onboarded. Your second priority is likely going to be the teams that are moving to Kubernetes and scared, or moving to Kubernetes and or moved already to Kubernetes and not having a great time. So you have to think about how to prioritize in a way that makes sense for your organization. It could also be based on technical requirements. Let's say there is an absolutely business critical application that might need to come first, and that's okay. Next, you need to do discovery. So for each of those cohorts, what are their technical requirements, but also what are their soft requirements? What are their pain points? What would be, a game changer for them if they could have inside of their day-to-day process? What are they afraid of? What scares them the most about moving to a platform? And make sure you can address that. After that, you're going to do what we call an internal marketing strategy. So developing an internal marketing strategy means you need to have a very clear picture of how you are going to go to your organization and the teams within it and get them excited about using a platform. There is so much information out there about this now. And we talk about it quite a bit too. But it is really important to do this well. And it's important to do it within the context of your organization, not just because the internet says so. So make sure you keep that in mind. And then finally, what you're going to do is kind of put everything together, and you're going to deliver an adoption model and a plan for scaling. That plan needs to be sustainable, and that plan needs to be realistic. I encourage you to be fairly pragmatic when you're planning this stuff out, but also at the same time, connect with the fact that things will change, and that's okay. Don't get too stuck on one timeline or one way of doing things. You may very quickly realize that, the cohorts you prioritized previously might need to change. But no matter what, get a plan together. If that plan changes, awesome. In the meantime, get something on paper, theoretical paper. I don't know if I've actually seen anyone put this on real paper yet, but that's what's important. So I'm going to leave you with a quote before we get to questions. And that quote is, if you want something you have never had, you must be willing to do something you have never done. I like this quote because I think it really exemplifies platform engineering as a whole. It's brand new, but it can do some amazing things inside of an organization, not just from a technical perspective and a business perspective, but a human experience perspective. Change is scary. Change is hard. And if you're willing to go through the process of making that change sustainable and also making it accessible to your org, it's going to be very cool in the end. And I think you'll end up with something that can make a big difference. So keep that quote in mind, and yeah, best of luck on your platform engineering journey. It's hard. It's a long road, but you know what? There's a lot of great tools in place, and there's a lot of things like the MVP that will make it easier for you in the long run. I see teams start these journeys every single week, and I also see teams every single week that are onboarding their first group, their first cohort, their second cohort, their 10th. It is achievable if you follow the right structure and you plan well. So hopefully you now have some ideas to do that. And yeah, now we can take some questions.
Thank you, Mallory, for your valuable information today, and your presentation was amazing. We don't have yet any questions, so everyone, or if any of you guys has, you're welcome. If any of you guys have any question regarding the presentation of Mallory, now it's the time to do it. Also remember that if someone also can reach out directly to her, that you totally can do it by Slack. But just in case, if someone wants to know something else or something that you need to know more deep dive, we are here to help you. No one? Are you sure?
Yeah, it feels unusual. Normally we do get quite a good
Yeah,
bit of Q&A here.
yeah. Thanks, Mauricio. Well, if that's the case, and
Oh, there looks like there's
yes,
one. Cool. Okay. Do you want me to read it out, Sophia?
yeah. Is there some consensus of what should or shouldn't be included in the platform? You mentioned being very user focused, and I am very curious if in general you've found certainly types of tools and capabilities that should be included in the platform.
Great question, and a very common one. The landscape around platform engineering tooling is quite interesting and it's always evolving. So there's actually a really great website, what's the platformengineering.org website that has a resource here for you. So let me just show you. Let me just show you something here. So what I'm going to show you is, oops, come on, Chrome, be nice. So what I'm going to show you is the platform engineering tooling landscape page, the lander on platformengineering.org. All you need to do is hit this guy up here and you'll get taken to this. What's cool about this is it breaks up the interaction planes of the platform. So each of these planes, these purple, light purple squares, represents a component of an internal developer platform and represents a plane on which an interaction can occur. The developer control plane is the place that devs tend to interact with these things. And there's multiple different components. So you have an IDE, whatever you choose to use there. There's developer portals, there's different version control. There's a lot of different things you can look at inside of this. And there's this broken down for each of the planes. You also have, for example, integration delivery, you have CD, you have image registries, platform orchestrators, you have CD pipelines, all sorts of stuff. For any of these on this page, there is also some different talks on reference architecture. So what that is basically a real world example of how people have built their IDPs and what they look like, kind of in a similar diagram format. There's some cool stuff in here. And I encourage you guys to take a look. But in terms of the tools themselves, you can actually just go plane by plane on this particular filtering screen and get what you need. So we're always adding to this all the time at platformengineering.org. And I know that this space evolves constantly. So it's always adjusting. If you have something you'd like to see added to this, just let the platformengineering.org team know. But generally, there are some great tools there. The other thing I will recommend is if you can get your hands on some reference architectures that are geared towards your setup, so whether or not it's AWS, GCP, Azure, OpenShift, whatever you're using, get your hands on those. At Humanitech's website, we do have some of those that you can look at and just see sort of the common tools used in the space. I mean, if you're using one cloud provider, chances are a lot of their stuff works well together. But for recommendations outside of that, I definitely recommend checking those out. But yeah, great question.
Thanks, Mallory. Well, we have here also one from Rodrigo saying, sorry, any tip about doc links for this MVP to start specifically?
Yeah, I mean, we have on the Humanitech website now, actually, we just put something up. And so how we break it down when you're using our product on the side of things, you can go check that out inside of our documentation there. But those platform con videos, those reference architecture videos are also a really good place to start. Look at how other people have done it. I will say that there is more and more happening in the context of outward facing documentation on this stuff. Like there are more and more, like I've seen a couple Medium articles now, some LinkedIn posts of what people are building. Keeping in mind it's still, a fairly young concept in this space as a whole. So it's starting to evolve and people are starting to follow our best practices and go with it. We have some good documentation on it. And like I said, platformengineering.org does as well with those platform con talks. Definitely take a look at those.
Thank you. Does Humanitech and Backstage do the same thing as the Foundation of Engineering platform?
No, absolutely not. I'll try not to get too product heavy here because I think it's important to show the entire space, but Humanitech has a couple different components. When you look at platforms, there's the front end component and there's the back end component. The back end is the most important piece because the back end, just like in any application, controls the flow of data, controls the flow of information, and controls the interaction. The back end is how things work. The front end is how you interact with those things. So Humanitech itself has a front end layer, has its own portal, but it is not designed to replace what Backstage does. Backstage is very different. It's a different kind of portal, and it really depends on your needs. And other portals like Cortex and Port, same thing. So there's that layer of Humanitech, then there's also the platform orchestrator layer, which when you look at the reference architecture diagrams, sits inside of that integration delivery plane and basically allows everything to talk to each other. That is very different. That's something Backstage doesn't do. It's not designed to do it, frankly. So that is something I would look at. And then the other thing is, I should mention too, platformengineering.org has some really amazing courses that will give you more information on exactly what all of this stuff is and how it all plays together. So I would encourage you to check that out. I actually teach a good portion of these courses now. So we do talk about this stuff. We do talk about, what is a platform orchestrator? What is a portal? What are all of these things and how do they fit together? Definitely take a look at the courses because they really do tell a story. And they tell a lot about how this whole space works together because it can be very confusing. In terms of Humanitech itself, if you would like a demo, please get in touch with me. That is all I will say on that because I'm not a salesperson, but I'm happy to arrange a demo for you. And we'll also just leave it at that. So yeah, we can get to some other questions.
Thank you, Mallory. Well, we have another one from Michael saying, can you talk about cultural aspect? I'm at an organization where we have many different ways of doing many different things, and we really like standardization. When I propose the AWS Ref architecture by Humanitech, I get a response from upper management that we are of just worried that no one will use it. I'm planning one push through an MVP with a few other engineerings, and hopefully we can get their buy-in after that.
Yeah, and you know what? It's a good place to start with showing someone a reference architecture. But when it comes to management, what is important to them is not that reference architecture. Maybe your CTO, but the rest of them are more interested in, okay, but if we're going to spend this money, what are we going to get out of it from the business perspective? What that often looks like is faster time to market, higher standardization, which means better security, and more fail safes. When you look at what's important to the people you are asking for the budget to build something, you need to build that value in their context. You need to talk their language. Executives do not care about GitOps. I will tell you that right now. I see that every day. So what's important is you need to understand what's important to them and how you can design the value props for that into what you're building. There's when we walk through people through MVPs on the Humanitech side, we really make sure that we take the time to address that. And if you're not, if you're just running an MVP on your own, that is something that often gets missed. It's that you focus too much on toys and tech and not enough on outcomes. Get information on what those outcomes need to look like and then build to it. From a cultural aspect, change is hard, but you can make change easier by showing people why doing it is the right thing to do in their specific context, not some random technical one. Hope that helps.
For sure, it will. We have another one from Emmanuel saying, there is no silver bullets for good software design architecture, but there are definitely best practices and validations you should have specifically when we refer to security. Does or should the platform simplify and offer turnkey components for out solutions? For example, offering a complete policy management solution, PIP, PAP, or wherever?
Yep, absolutely. That can often be an absolutely critical component. The idea behind the platform is at the end of the day, me as a software engineer, I do not need to worry about any of that stuff. It's taken care of for me. it's done in a way that meets the standards and requirements of my security org, it's not something I have to think about. You can build all sorts of stuff into that standardization layer. And again, you have to do it in the context of what's important. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. There's, as a best practice, I was always kind of told and always taught from a software design, security isn't MVP. And I would encourage you to think that way. Now, do you have to go in and build through all of your policy checks inside of your MVP when you're not touching production, chances are it's sandbox? Probably not. But you need to keep that security team on board with what you're doing and have them involved in the design process. I think that's really important.
Thank you. Well, there are some people asking if they will get the recording. Yes, Luisa
Yes.
and Juan, you will get it tomorrow. So don't worry about it. Also, the presentation, so everyone can have the whole information. At least for now, we don't have any other questions. So if that's the case, this will be all for today. Michael, don't worry that this matter that you already sent, I will pass it directly to Mallory. So probably she will help you during like the finalization of this call. And
sure. It just looks like there's a few last little things trickling in here that I'll just address really quickly.
yeah.
No problem, Emmanuel. That happens. That is part of doing this. So what about libraries? You're a fan of sidecars to avoid build time dependencies, but libraries are often an interesting solution. Not a fan of offering them. Honestly, you have to do what works for you from a technical standpoint. I like libraries because I am a developer that doesn't want to reinvent the wheel with stuff. If there is something out there that offers a solution that works for our needs, chances are I'm going to use it. But that's just me. And what works for your team is very different. That being said, I see all sorts of platforms designed with sidecar stuff inside of it. I think it's like 2 days ago, I was mapping out one for one of our teams, a sidecar that's very important for their API delivery and just sort of how they actually serve that API to their customers. Like there's all sorts of stuff you can do here. Yeah, like I'm fairly do what works for you. Because if you want my actual opinion on like software tools, you're probably going to be very surprised on some things. I just like what I like, and I've been doing it a long time. So probably don't ask. Got to do what works for you.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Emmanuel, also. We will send you this information. Joshua says, regarding selling the benefits of a platform to executives, is there a common value gain from platforms that executives tend to appreciate?
Absolutely. There are 3 that I will give you. The first one is that you decrease time to market. When you add standardization and automation, which is what you really do when you put platform engineering initiatives in place, you seriously reduce the time it takes to get things out there, to get features deployed, because you're not wasting time waiting for stuff. So that's the first one. The second one is costs decrease. There's a variety of reasons why this can happen, including that standardization and automation layer. So if you build in that component of, when you spin up an ephemeral environment, it's killed within 15 minutes if nothing's happening with it. And hey, you don't need 30 gigs of RAM for it, I promise you. If the right guardrails are in place, then costs really can come under control. One of the things that I've seen that's quite interesting is I've seen quite a few orgs now that can reduce the number of cloud accounts they have. So, good example, there was one that we started an MVP with a few weeks ago. Right now, they have about 1,000 AWS accounts spread across different business units and teams. And basically, the way we are helping them standardize things, we'll be able to get down to a handful. And that saves a huge, there's a bug in here, a huge amount of cost. That scares the hell out of me thinking about 1,000 AWS accounts. But when you can reduce it because you're standardizing things and there's no longer that fear of, teams needing their own control over things because it's centralized, it does reduce the cost. And the third thing, and this one's kind of fluffy, but I will say that to executives, it still makes a big difference, especially if you're in a highly competitive space, is you can increase innovation. And the reason why is because people are not waiting. People are able to actually get back to doing what they do, which is building software. And when you can have time to actually do that, you can build some pretty cool stuff. And that really, like, I would say that's the three critical business impact areas that we see. And obviously each organization is different. What I encourage you to do if you're trying to map what is valuable to your organization in this way is generally most places will have like a shareholder report that gets sent out every year if you're at that stage. Take a look at that, see what the priorities are, see what the goals are. And chances are you can map a platform engineering initiative against those three pillars of impact into what your executive team is working on.
Thank you, Mallory. Thanks everyone for the questions that you did. If
No worries.
anyone else has anything more to add or ask. No? Thank you, Joshua. Well, I think that's it for today, Mallory. And again,
Yep.
thanks everyone for being here today with us. Again, just to let you know, we will send the presentation tomorrow and also the recording so everyone can have the whole information. And if you still have any question or something that you want to learn more, you can ask also Mallory directly on the Slack channel. So she probably will reply very fast. Thanks,
As
everyone.
fast as I can.
Thanks, Mallory. Thank you.